Now, when I say loudspeakers, all of y'all are used to imagining a rectangular box with black cones dotted somewhere around the bodywork. But did you know that there exists a completely different set of loudspeakers that look and work extremely differently to what you're used to? Let me introduce you all to the electrostatic loudspeaker. Now, these speakers are sometimes 6 feet tall or more and are quite thin around the edges and are quite chunky at the bottom. The bottom bit is what houses the subwoofer module and all the electronics that powers the speaker. Now, the electrostatic speaker is not just different from a traditional loudspeaker in the way it looks, but it's also very different in how it reproduces sound. Now, traditionally, and I use the word traditionally very lightly here, a loudspeaker typically has a voice coil and a magnet setup. Now, you apply an electrical signal to the voice coil, which is typically the audio signal which comes from the audio amplifier. Now, that creates an attractive and repellent force due to the placement of the permanent magnet just around the voice coil. The voice coil is then further connected to a spider which is connected to this cone, or the typical black conical structure or this round structure which you see on the bodywork of a traditional loudspeaker. This is what reproduces sound. Every time the audio signal, when it goes from positive to negative, it creates a magnetic field around it, and that leads to attraction and repulsion from the permanent magnet around which it is cased. This in turn moves air, and that is what creates sound in a loudspeaker which uses a voice coil and a magnet. Now, contrast this to how an electrostatic speaker works. For starters, the electrostatic speaker has two connections. One which is connected to the audio amplifier, pretty similar to how it's connected in an electromagnetic speaker or a traditional speaker as we spoke about earlier. But the second connection is also to directly an electrical wall outlet. Now, why do we need two connections, one to an electrical wall outlet and the other one to an audio amplifier? Well, to understand that, we'll first have to understand how electrostatic speakers are made. Now, electrostatic speakers typically consist of three major parts. The first part is a thin film of plastic which is stretched extremely tight and is coated in a conductive material like graphite. This thin, extremely tight piece of plastic which is coated in graphite, let's call that the diaphragm. The extremely thin and tight piece of plastic is placed between two perforated steel sheets called the stators. Now, the space between the diaphragm and the two stators, we have something called spacers to just make sure that the diaphragm and the two perforated steel sheets do not touch each other. So now we have the three important parts of an electrostatic loudspeaker. We have the diaphragm, we have the two stators, and we have the spacers. So now, how does all of this actually work? So remember, we had two electrical connections, one to the wall outlet and one to an audio amplifier. So now we have the electrical wall outlet which is connected to the thin piece of plastic which we spoke about earlier called the diaphragm. And we also have the audio amplifier which is then connected to a step-up transformer placed inside the body of the electrostatic loudspeaker, typically found at the base, and that's why the base is always a bit chunkier than usual. Now, when you connect it to an electrical wall outlet, the diaphragm automatically gets a positive charge attached to it. The onboard audio amplifier is connected to a step-up transformer placed in the bottom bit of the electrostatic loudspeaker. And that's why the bottom bit of the electrostatic loudspeaker is a bit chunkier than usual, because it houses not just the subwoofer module, but it also houses the step-up transformer. Now, the step-up transformer is going to up the voltage to very high levels onto the stators. So now what's going to happen? So the diaphragm, which has a positive charge to it, is going to get repelled by the positive charge on the stator, but also simultaneously get attracted to the negative charge on the stator. And as the voltage alternates between positive and negative depending on the audio signal, the diaphragm is going to move extremely quickly between the two stators, and that is what is going to push the air and reproduce sound. And the reason it's called an electrostatic loudspeaker is because there exists an electrostatic field between the diaphragm and the stators. And because of the very nature of electrostatic loudspeakers, they are typically classified as dipoles. That means they're emanating sound from the front panel and also from the back of the panel. So if you stand right between, it's kind of funny. If you stand right between the thin edge of the electrostatic loudspeaker, if you stand right there, you will probably end up hearing nothing, because the waves emanating from the front and back sort of cancel each other out where they meet. It's kind of fun. But also, when you keep the electrostatic loudspeaker a little away from the wall, typically let's say about a meter and a half away from the wall, it'll give the reflections coming from the back enough time to sort of hit the wall and come back to you, making the speaker sound extremely natural, something that no other electromagnetic loudspeaker can achieve. Apart from sounding extremely natural and lifelike, electrostatic speakers also have another advantage, is that they can discern the mid and high frequencies extremely well. No other electromagnetic speaker can come close to the frequency response, especially in the mid and high frequencies. So with so many amazing qualities of electrostatic loudspeakers, why isn't the world just like using electrostatic loudspeakers everywhere, and why don't I own a pair? Well, the simple answer is I don't like them. Um, they have a lot of disadvantages, and those disadvantages are something that I personally cannot live with. One being that they are very directional, and that being said, by being extremely directional, that means you cannot sort of move around the space when you're listening to music, because as soon as you even sort of like just shift your position, your seating position, the sweet spot is going to change. You are going to have very different imaging. You may just lose your imaging and sound stage as well. Now, it all depends on how you like to listen to music, whether you like to be glued to your seat and no disturbances whatsoever, or if you like to entertain when you listen to music and you like to move around the space. It all depends on how you like to enjoy your music. For me, I like to move around the space, I like to entertain, etc. So then just having speakers which are so directional and messing up the sweet spot is something that I personally don't like. Obviously, the sweet spot does change every time you move a little, because speakers are calibrated to your seating position, to your ear height, etc. But it's a little bit different with electrostats. Another point is, although not so common, some electrostatic speakers are prone to arcing. Now, arcing happens when the electricity sort of jumps from one stator to the other, because of the high voltages applied to those stators. Over time, this can damage the diaphragm, and the speaker will just not sound as it used to sound when you first bought it. The sound of the speakers and the sound signature also changes depending on altitude and humidity levels. So let's say you audition the speaker at sea level, but you stay a little higher up in the mountainside or something. The speakers are going to sound very different compared to what they sounded when you auditioned them at sea level. Even changes in humidity will affect the sound signature. But my biggest complaint with electrostatic loudspeakers is that they just cannot handle bass dynamics that well as electromagnetic loudspeakers. Because of the very nature of that thin diaphragm and the stators, the mid and high frequencies are amazing, absolutely gorgeous, but it really suffers when it comes to the bass response. Low frequencies, as you would have it, their wavelengths are quite large, and those wavelengths, because they're dipoles, sort of cancel each other out, because the wavelengths are sort of larger than the size of the panel, or they may end up getting larger than the size of the panel, and they will sort of cancel each other out. And if you're the type of person who likes to listen to one genre of music, like let's say it's very vocal heavy, it's very instrumental heavy, these speakers are great for you. But if you are someone like me who likes to listen to a variety of genres, like let's say hard rock, metal, hip hop, a little bit of EDM, etc., then these speakers are just not meant for you. These speakers are meant for, let's say, a couple of genres, Dynacrawl, high on vocals, for example. Not for listening to, let's say, Foo Fighters or Guns N' Roses. I would not recommend you do that with these speakers. So if you're locked into a particular genre or a couple of genres which rely on mid and high frequencies, these speakers are great for you. If not, then I would give these speakers a pass. But like everything else in hi-fi, it's all dependent on your personal choice and your personal flavor. If you like listening to stuff which is, again, mid and high frequency focused, or if you like listening to audio when you're just seated, glued to your seat, and you just want the speakers to fill the room, fill the space, great. But again, that's hi-fi. Let me know in the comments if you've had any experiences listening to electrostatic loudspeakers, and if you have any opinions to share. Cheers, see you soon.